I want to thank everybody and thank Molly for coming and giving us their presentation. She's an author and artist, the award-winning book Trees of the West and Artist Guide. Trees of the West is published by Mountaineers Books, an independent nonprofit publisher of outdoor recreation and sustainable lifestyles and conservation books, headquartered in, I believe, Oregon. Molly has appreciated trees all her life. They have shaped her as a hiker, outdoors lover, gardener, traveler, and artist. She pays homage to them through her art, working in many different media, each revealing different aspects of these stalwart companions, crisp lines, imposing silhouettes, and subtle and sometimes brilliant hues of foliage. Each featured species also includes a rich natural history and brief ethnobotanical note alongside the sidebars and tips and techniques and poems and quotes from well-known writers celebrating our connection to trees. Molly emphasizes her personal experiences with nature, telling stories about her encounters with trees everywhere from her backyard to national parks and forests throughout the West. She focuses primarily on native trees with special interest in 46 major species found across the region. Rooted in place, trees offer endless opportunities for observation, admiration, relaxation, and inspiration. Trees of the West invites us to pause and appreciate these sentinels in all their quiet glory. Dedicated to connecting people with nature through hands-on art experiences, Mally teaches aspiring artists and has led plein air workshops throughout the West, including the North Cascades Institute, Yellowstone Forever Institute, and Sitka Center for Art and Ecology. Her previous books include Birds of the West, Colors of the West, and Mount Rainier National Park, an artist tour. Her nature-inspired work has also appeared on cards and calendars for the past 3 decades, and she lives in Seattle, Washington. To learn more about the book and about Molly's experiences, you can go to mollyhashimoto.com and you can pick up her book and other books at on nature from mountaineers.org, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and many of your local favorite bookstores. So welcome, Molly. It's all yours. We're looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I'm just going to say hi to everybody pretty briefly, and then we're going to go to share screen where I'll show you slides from the book. And I really appreciate all of you joining me. I know some of you aren't from the West Coast, but I hope you're going to find things that are interesting to you also. So thanks a lot. Jeff, I think we should go ahead and share the screen. Yeah, I'd like to start, but this is the copy of, it's the cover of the book. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about my childhood and how I got interested in art and writing. My dad really appreciated nature, and he gave us the complete Golden Guides, including this little volume on trees. I think this and all of the time that I spent playing outdoors in Denver helped me develop my appreciation for trees. I was drawing as a child, and I never really stopped doing it, even though when I went to college, I became an English major. So being an English major and being somebody who loved books, it was pretty natural for me to end up in the book business for many years. And my job at Elliott Bay Books in Seattle was to buy the note cards, posters, calendar, and children's books. And so I got to know a lot of the sales reps, including the one for Pomegranate. And Pomegranate's out of Portland, Oregon. And I had mentioned to one of the sales reps that I did some painting, and she suggested that I send my work to Pomegranate. And the owners, Katie and Tom Burke, liked the art and published it. That was about 40 years ago, and they have been publishing my work ever since then. However, it wasn't until I started doing the block prints that my art took off with the public. So I just wanted to show you a few of the things that Pomegranate published. I've been collecting field guides and natural history books for quite a long time. And you'll see a few here. One of my favorites is Northwest Trees, beautifully illustrated and really great descriptions of Northwest trees. I would say one of my favorite all-time books is The Natural History of Western Trees by Donald Culross Peattie, and he actually also did one for Eastern trees, which some of you folks from the East Coast may be aware of, but he's a wonderful writer. And really, I would say without these books and the inspiration they gave me, there's no way I could have written my book. You can see I really have quite the library. I like to go to used bookstores and I find all kinds of cool stuff there. I go to Pal's in Portland quite often. Um, I think that the hiking that I did in the mountains and along the ocean after I moved to Seattle, it really did give me the impetus to learn more about trees and learn how to paint them. And I think my hikes in the mountains were some of my very favorites. Oh, I want to go back and show you Timberline. Um, this book is by Stephen Arno, and it's quite fascinating. In it, he wrote that few people gazing out upon a timberline for the first time can imagine how many interacting phenomena are involved in this forest frontier. And for me, it was really impossible to ignore the amazing forms that these trees took, as well as noticing that different species thrived at different altitudes. So this is an etching that I did of a grove of mountain hemlocks. It was on the railroad grade trail near Mount Baker. And one of the trees had developed multiple trunks through layering. And I just thought it was really one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And maybe some of you have heard of the 19th century German explorer and scientist Alexander von Humboldt. He was a geographer, explorer, and naturalist whose work established the foundation for biogeography and a more complex way of viewing the natural world. On one of his expeditions, he climbed Mount Chimborazo in the Andes, and the different plant life that he observed at different altitudes, many of these individuals having counterparts in the Swiss Alps, led him to develop the idea of ecosystems. He viewed plants in the context of their elevation, soil, and climate. He wasn't as interested in taxonomy as he was in creating a fluid and connected system where all things were related. And I love this quote from him. He said, "Nature is a living whole, not a dead aggregate." And one of the things I admire most about him is the way he combined science and art in this diagram that he created after his trip. It's quite famous. It's called a Naturgemälde. When I hike now, I find myself looking for the trees that I know from my previous outings. An example is the Sierra juniper. I first saw it about 10 years ago in the autumn along the Tioga Road at Olmsted Point in Yosemite National Park. You have to cross the road and you got to climb up some granite slabs. It's not really climbing, it's more like light scrambling. Takes about 5 minutes to get up to this 1,000-year-old tree. And I liked it so much that I had my husband photograph me next to it. I don't usually like photos of myself, but I just had to have this one because my body puts the tree in scale. And I just thought it was fabulous. I did return to Yosemite about a year and a half ago, and I brought my students. I was teaching a class for the Yosemite Conservancy, and I brought my students to the exact same place. Now that was in May. This photo is from October. In May, the penstemon were blooming in the cracks of the granite, but it was the same tree, and I was powerfully moved. And I did paintings of this because when I get really moved or excited by something, I really like to do art. So here's a picture of me that my friend Paul took just a year and a half ago. You can see it was very cold because it was in May, or actually early June, and there was still snow up there, but it was really, really interesting to see it in different seasons. And one of the most interesting things I discovered as I studied trees was how they had moved around the planet over eons. Scientists called paleobotanists and paleogeographers look at fossil records to learn the past history of plant life on Earth. And I'd like to read a passage from a sketchbook that I kept on a visit to Yellowstone. Walking near Indian Creek and Swan Lake at Yellowstone, I looked west toward Quadrant and Antler Peaks and saw only the tiniest patches of snow up high. I remember in earlier years on this exact date seeing much more snow. I tried not to feel the now familiar realization that if it was another sign of our changing world, but rather I chose to see it as evidence of a world that would become a different place after my short lifespan. Short when compared to the deep time of the planet. Different plants would grow. Trees might move up or down gullies, depending on whether they could survive in that new and warmer world. One species might die out altogether, the way Alaska cedars did in all but the coolest north-facing ravines in central Oregon, where they now exist only as relict populations. And another, more adaptable tree like the Douglas fir, already widespread, might thrive fully. We don't often think of trees moving. They seem such stable inhabitants of the world. But in geological time, trees race east and west across mountain ranges and north and south along the coasts. And conifers are truly ancient, having existed and evolved for more than 300 million years. Later, the broadleaf trees appeared and were much more successful than the conifers. They were able to store energy more effectively, as well as to attract pollinators to their flowers, which was a more efficient method of reproduction, since conifers rely mostly on wind dispersal of seeds. But conifers did have an advantage in harsher ecosystems. They were able to keep their foliage year-round and derive nutrition from poor soils. During that time, continents moved, merged, and separated again. Mountain ranges have arisen and been eroded. Climates went from tropical to Arctic and back, and forests became inland seas or deserts or forest once again. In this long time span, many species became extinct or adapted or moved. Conifers moved to mountains and northern climates where they had an advantage. The author of A Natural History of Conifers, perhaps you guys are familiar with this book, Aljos Farjan, calls these locations fortresses of poverty, and they have allowed over 600 species of conifer to survive the advances of the broadleaf trees. So the book in the beginning, I have a map which shows the biogeography of forest types in the West, and it includes some of the following: northern coastal and Cascades, redwood, woodlands, California coastal, Rocky Mountain, giant sequoia, subalpine, and Great Basin and Southwest deserts. And this is how the book is organized. In each chapter, I describe the general biome or ecoregion, and then I write about selected individual species and their characteristics. And since my primary focus is art, I'm an artist, there are lots of sidebars that describe techniques. So it's full of watercolors and an introductory chapter where I share my palette and ideas for mixing colors. Especially important are greens. Here's a Douglas fir trunk where I've created texture by dragging the brush. It's a technique also known as dry brush. To paint the very delicate branches of this vine maple, which I saw up on Diablo Lake in the North Cascades, I used a really thin, tiny brush called a rigger. And the reason it's called a rigger is that they used to use this brush to paint ship's rigging. Here you can see a detail of it. And, you know, it would be very hard to get such delicate lines from a regular paintbrush. This one is a monochrome pen sketch of Joshua trees, which are members of the agave family. They're not truly trees. I was recently at Joshua Tree, and I just thought it was one of the coolest places I've ever been. I recommend it. I'd never been there before. I actually did this sketch from a photo before I had gone there because my publisher really wanted me to represent some of the species from the Southwest. And, you know, the Southwest isn't really known for a lot of trees. Anyway, the Joshua trees are wonderful. And I used varying values of the Tombow brush pens. They're these really neat pens with both a a thin drawing tip and a brush tip. And so you can do a lot of fun stuff with them, different shades of gray. And I've used them several times when I've been outside. They're real easy, you can transport them. I would do a real quick pencil sketch and then just kind of lay in the values with not this many of the pens. I'd probably only bring about 3 or 4. And I also really like printmaking and etching. And these are 2 etching plates. They're done on copper. And on the left, you see alders, birches, and vine maple. And then on the right, we've got a mountain hemlock. And these tools are what you etch into the plate. I also love block printing, and these are the tools made by Speedball that I use when I'm carving a safety cut block. This was a drawing that I did of a foxtail pine, and first thing I did was I used a marker, and then I used some colored pencils because I kind of wanted to get an idea of what colors I would be using when I did the final print. So this is just sort of a mock-up or thumbnail. And this is what the safety cut looks after I've carved out everything that's going to be a color. Anything that's raised, it's called a relief print, is going to print black. So there you see the black. And there it is with the color. I love doing this with a lot of different media and subjects. So this is another block print. This one is a colonnade of cedars, which I saw outside of New Salem, Washington, right in the national park, North Cascades. And these cedars grew up from a nurse log. So they really did form an exact colonnade. It's just stunning. I'm always recommending that people go look at it because all you do is cross the Skagit River and walk about 10 minutes and you can see this colonnade. So this is a block print too. Jeff mentioned at the beginning that I teach classes for Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, and it's kind of funny because when I tell people that, they always think I'm talking about Sitka, Alaska. But the Sitka spruce, you probably are aware, it grows all along the West Coast, down, just about as far as the redwoods in California. Anyway, so Sitka Center is on the Central Oregon coast, and I did this from after I'd seen some deer in a meadow outside of Sitka Center, and I liked framing the deer with this lovely bough of a Sitka spruce. And I really love these trees. In fact, this summer, or actually in September, I'm teaching a class for them where we're just going to do all kinds of stuff with the Sitka spruce with very many different media. I wanted to read you a short passage about them. The Sitka spruce is present in all coastal areas of the Pacific Northwest, and it's the dominant tree species along the Oregon coast. Everywhere are enormous buttressed trunks clothed in a rough textured bark without furrow or grooves. The color ranges from gray violet to maroon and cinnamon, hues often overtaken by the bright chartreuse of mosses and other epiphytes. In young trees, the branches reach up toward the sky, uplifted in a herringbone pattern. But in much older individuals, many branches have been weighed down so that they jut out at nearly a 45-degree angle. The flat needles are 5/8 to 1 inch long and bright yellow-green on the upper surface and blue-green and waxy beneath. The cones are 2 to 3.5 inches long, cylindrical and orange-brown. I only read you that little passage because I wanted you to know for each of the species, I try to give, some defining characteristics. But I finish by saying artists look for underlying patterns, setting aside the extraneous to penetrate to the fundamental order in a landscape. In the coastal forest, with such limited numbers of tree species, the organization is obvious. The landscape is remarkably uncluttered and simple because of the dominance of the spruce. It punctuates all the vertical and horizontal space like a musical score. Tall trunks and perpendicular branches at regular intervals. This was a watercolor I did walking down to the ocean from the Sitka Center. One morning, the mist was rising and the sun was coming through, and it was really, really beautiful. I'm also a gardener, and perhaps some of you are aware of this very delightful Sitka spruce. It's a dwarf called Papoose, and I've had this one for about maybe 3 years. It's quite happy. We get a lot of rain here in Seattle, so the climate isn't so vastly different from the coast. Another species that I very much love is the Douglas fir, very common. And these two are twin giants from the Grove of the Patriarchs at Mount Rainier National Park. Unfortunately, the access to that has been closed for the last couple of years because they had flooding. But once they get it reopened, I highly recommend going there. People do talk about the giant sequoias and the redwoods, but I found that the trees in the Grove of the Patriarchs at Mount Rainier are absolutely as significant and awe-inspiring. So see if you can check it out. Another species, very common, is the paper birch in northern Washington, and this is one I saw on Diablo Lake in early spring. The subalpine tree species are probably the ones I've created the most art about since I moved to Washington and started hiking in the mountains. The mountain hemlock can achieve great heights when it gets adequate moisture. This specimen was actually along that same trail where I showed you the one that had developed multiple trunks from layering. And this one also on the railroad grade trail at Mount Baker. First, I painted it as a watercolor, and then I tried it as a block print. And finally, I sketched this one on location on the Thunder Creek Trail in the North Cascades. I've done a lot of classes for the North Cascades Institute, and we bring the students to various locations where we paint, and it's always been really wonderful and really fun. I'm not yet scheduled to do anything for them this year, but I hope I will be. And this one may be one of my favorite etchings. I saw this tree leaning out over the trail. It was actually the Pacific Crest Trail just south of Stevens Pass. It's a major highway that goes from Everett, Washington to Leavenworth. And it's quite accessible. You can hike up the trail from the ski area. In Washington, I think most people are acquainted with the subalpine larch. They turn a spectacular gold in autumn before losing their needles. It's one of the few deciduous conifers. And a great place to see them is Washington Pass, and that is Highway 20 between Burlington and the Methow Valley, Winthrop, Washington. So from Highway 20, you can view them on the lower slopes of Liberty Bell and surrounding peaks. It's pretty hard to pinpoint exactly when this happens, but it's usually about the second week of October. And people really do flock to this place to see them because it's just stunning. They're kind of a gold. They're not really yellow. And it's a pretty rare tree. It really only exists in Washington and a few locations. There are other larches, Western larch, which is more widespread. And another subalpine species that is perhaps a little less showy is the whitebark pine. You'll often see a bleached out trunk in picturesque postures with leafy new boughs growing out, like I did here at Crater Lake. There are a lot of them at Crater Lake. And Mount Rainier is famous for its beautiful colonies of subalpine firs. In lower elevations, the tree can become enormous, but in the higher meadows, it's rather compact. And this is a view from the trail at Nisqually Vista, which is very close to Paradise. Yeah, so there are also hemlocks here. And the California coast offers its own beautiful species, including coast live oaks, Torrey pines, Monterey cypress, and even groves of pygmy oaks. So I do try to be somewhat comprehensive with the trees that I write about. Even though I live in Washington, I have traveled a lot to Oregon and California, and most recently Arizona. This is a Monterey cypress block print. And the Rocky Mountain forests are known for their aspen groves, like this one that I saw at Yellowstone above the Mammoth Terraces. And actually, I don't have that one in there. I'm sorry. This one is a grove near the Slough Creek Trail. And I saw that at near sunset one day. Southern subalpine forests have their own spectacular beauty. I showed you the Sierra juniper from Yosemite. Here's a view of Half Dome from Olmsted Point, which is very close to where I saw that Sierra juniper. There are also some very magnificent groves of red firs in Yosemite near Glacier Point on the Fisher's Trail, as well as along the Tioga Road. This is a young red fir, and they have this beautiful kind of bluish green foliage. Then as they get bigger and bigger, not so blue-green, but they have lovely reddish bark. And I was really taken with this. This happened in the fall when I saw this one. There are a lot of species in Yosemite. The Sierras probably have some of the most diverse mountain habitats. This tree is the Fremont cottonwood, which grows alongside the Merced River. And on a fall morning, you can really feel the beautiful contrast between the granite monoliths and the pastoral valley. And just wanted to show you just a few of the books that I had done. This one is a watercolor of fireweed. This is a kind of a burnt out forest that I saw near the Methow Valley. I'm working on a new book about wildflowers of the West, and it's been fun doing a lot of the research for that book. This is another one that might appear in that book. This is Half Dome with some Pacific dogwoods. Yeah, so I wanted to share with you before I close just a little passage that I wrote about the foxtail pine. All year I've been planning to go down to Kings Canyon to see the foxtail pines, and this is from a journal that I kept. The Sierra foxtail pine has been my version of Matheson's Himalayan snow leopard. I knew it would take a long, bumpy drive on a Forest Service gravel road or else an arduous hike of over 10 miles. I was ready and willing to do that, figuring I would fly to Fresno and rent a car. But then the pandemic struck, and all my plans, along with everyone else's, went nowhere. Aljos Farjan wrote that these foxtails are among the most beautiful stand of conifers he had ever seen. He's traveled all over the world as he researched conifers, so his words really meant a lot to me, and he had photos in his book that just were stunning. He was the head of the herbarium at the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. And I had seen photos that beckoned me. The foxtail's beautiful bark standing out against the blue of a sky seen at high altitude, their rich-hued sienna trunks growing at careless angles to snow in winter or granite in summer. How strange to think that a tree is as elusive as the snow leopard. This tree, more than any other I have learned about, has succeeded in the strategy of evasion that Farjan describes as the way of life of conifers, evading not only the broadleaf trees and other conifers, but also me. And maybe I like it even more now, its remoteness keeping me from knowing it, painting it, or photographing it. It has its own life separate from me. However, I did find an out-of-print book that had a really nice black and white photo of a foxtail pine. And so I used that as the basis for this illustration. I try not to use anybody's photo, but when it's a very old out-of-print book and I don't have any resources for myself, that works for me. And This was a sketch I did at Washington Pass. One of the days that I went up to see the larches, there were also some really nice understory shrubs turning red. And this is a very loose sketch of some Engelmann spruce, which is quite common there and in many places in the West. So I can answer any questions. I really appreciate you listening to my presentation. Uh, I can keep this screen on in case anybody has a question about something that, a piece of art. But if not, then I can come back on screen, Jeff. So whatever you think.
Sorry. Thank you, Molly. That was fabulous.
Oh, thanks.
If anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat. I'll turn on the feature where you can unmute yourself if you would like to speak and ask questions of Molly in person. I really enjoyed it. We actually got the book, and I haven't had a total enough time yet to go over all of it yet, but I'm really excited about the book and all the interesting things that you talk about, the trees and stuff, and how you depict them in watercolors and the prints and stuff. I'm not an artist, but I find it very fascinating. Um, Anybody have any questions?
Um, if I did want to say that, if any of you feel an inclination to do some art yourselves, I do classes for a Zoom presenter, Winslow Art Center, and I'm going to be doing a few this summer, beginning in May, where I talk about how I keep my sketchbooks, how I start out with them, the way I draw, keeping it very simple, sometimes on location, sometimes from my photos when I get home. And it'll be pretty brief, a 3-week class, and you can watch it whenever you want to. And then, of course, I'll be teaching at Sitka Center again and Yosemite Conservancy in fall. It'd be great to have you join me. I welcome beginners because I think it's really fun to teach people how to do this. Yeah. So I really hope that somebody will ask me a question, but if you don't have a question right now, but have one later, you can always reach me through my website or my email at smalleyhashimoto@comcast.net.
Oh, we had a lot of people saying thank you, beautiful artwork. Um, I have a question, if
Yes.
nobody else is going to ask. I saw some one section in your book it talks about the sugar pine cones, and I find that tree to be very exciting. I've not seen that. I've seen the redwoods, but does it grow similar? Is it just as big?
It's really big. There are some in Yosemite. They're in California and I think Southern Oregon, and they are huge and beautiful. And one of the coolest things about them are these enormous pine cones. And I actually collected one and I have it hanging from my carport. I just like looking at it. It's been there for several years now. The cones, like if you ever go to these Christmas shops where they sell, pine cones for you to decorate at Christmas time, sugar pines are the one largely what they sell and they also sell ponderosa pine cones too. Yeah, you need to see one and see the cones lying below the tree. There, you just can't believe it's that big.
And then it's so funny because the redwoods have such a tiny little cone.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was hoping that some of you guys would recognize my little dwarf Sitka spruce. You probably, I don't know, Jennifer and Jeff, do you guys recognize that? Did you?
Well, it's funny because I Googled it while you were talking because I'm like, I wonder what she's talking about. I don't know that more common name. Um, and I looked it up and it's Picea sinensis.
Yeah.
Sinensis. And
Citizens.
so it's you grow the variety called papoose. Well,
Mhm.
I've grown that variety too multiple times, and
Yeah.
I've killed it multiple times. It doesn't like living here in the southeast in the hot climate. So I can say that I've tried, but it really likes to be more northern.
Well, listen, I've got a similar story. There's a pine called Chief Joseph. Do you guys know about that one?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh,
All right. Well, I've killed two of them. I finally realized that it was not going to be happy in a container, so I put it in my front yard. And it's kind of sad because the first few years it still maintained this brilliant gold color in winter. But I find with each year it gets bigger and less gold, and it makes me very sad. And I'm trying to decide if I really want to spring for another one to put in a container. I absolutely adore that.
Uh,
I love it, but I think it's getting harder and harder to find. Am I right about that?
you can get Chief Joseph pretty easily in your
Really?
area. But it is a very difficult conifer to grow. Um,
Yeah.
I think
Ones
it's
that
the
stay
hardest.
yellow like that are a little bit easier. There's a lot of gold colored Pinus sylvestris,
Hmm.
which I think will do really well for you. Um, the Pinus contortas are just very tricky to grow, especially Chief Joseph.
Yeah, well, it's just really cool. But yeah, sometimes you just have to admit defeat, right? And
Oh, yeah.
the thing is, you guys live in Nashville where things are a bit different, but here in Seattle, it's very overcast in the winter. So I've got a real passion for yellow, gold, and brilliant conifers because they just brighten my life when I'm walking in and out of my house, and they seem necessary to me. So I'm always on the lookout for the bright golds.
Yes, absolutely. Pinus sylvestris
All
gold
right.
coin is a real
Coin.
nice
It's gold
thing.
coin.
Yes.
And it
Okay.
turns really pretty yellow in the winter for us here, so should.
Okay.
So we had a couple comments. Somebody wanted to know if you have a list of your books. And Molly will get that from you so that we can send it when we send the link to everybody so they can look for your other books. Um, do you sell prints of your work? If somebody's asking.
Yes, I do. And I have a website, mollyhashimoto.com. And some of them are on there, but I have to confess that I haven't been really great about putting the new prints up on the site. So what I tell people is if they like it, if they like a particular species, they could always write to me and see if I've done a print, because I tell you, I've done probably over 100 prints and they really aren't on my website.
Okay.
A lot of birds too, because I think I like everything outdoors. I like birds, flowers, trees. That's what I really love.
Right. Um, so somebody's commenting about they love your work, especially the watercolors. Do you know of any of these Western trees? Oops, sorry. Trees that survive in southwestern Ohio. I think a lot of these conifers will grow for you in Ohio. I think, um,
Yeah, I think Jennifer and Jeff would be better suited to answer that question.
yeah, and Jeff's at work, so he just disappeared, so he must have had to do something. So, yeah, you most of these conifers should grow really well in Ohio. Tess is saying that she lost two of her papoose too. I think it's just a real difficult plant to grow. Um, Sherry
Oh,
Speth says that she has a gold coin also, and she grows it clear in Wisconsin. And I'm telling you, she lives like in zone 4.
uh,
And we grow it in zone 7. So I think it's a good plant that can grow most anywhere. Um, I will say that it took a couple years for ours to get going, and I saved it from the electric company. They thought it was a weed, and I'm like, oh no, if you cut that down, so help me God.
oh,
Um, so yeah, but now that it's really established, it's putting on a good amount of growth every year and it's stunning.
great. I'm looking for it. I go to my local nursery, Swanson's, quite frequently. And yeah, I'm always looking out for the gold stuff. So I
Oh
will
yeah.
look at that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then Jerry says that she loves the woodblock work that you've been doing. She likes those prints. Oh, Jeff's back. Jeff, what grows, will these conifers grow for people in South Ohio? Yes.
Yeah, they should be able to.
Yeah.
There's zone 5. It
Yep.
should work out pretty good, especially the larches grow well in Ohio.
Yep.
I
You guys,
would,
have you guys ever seen a weeping larch? Because I've got one in my front yard. I really love it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
when we lived in New York, we had a weeping larch and they're amazing.
Well, I've thought about photographing my front yard because I've got a really sloping front yard and there's a lot of sun there. It's not real shady. And I have a lot of conifers there and most of them are quite happy. But unfortunately, the guy that helps me with some pruning, I had a cryptomeria. I'm trying to remember the hybrid name. It's one that turns a beautiful rusty red in the winter, and he kind of trimmed it back so far that it was brown. And then I felt kind of embarrassed about taking a picture of it, and I didn't want to share it with you. But if you're in Seattle for that meeting next year, I invite you to my house. I will show you.
Oh,
Okay.
cool. That'd be really awesome. One of the places, if you get a chance, to have time to go to, I think it's South Seattle Community College.
Yeah.
Albert Fincham has Conesian gardens there, and I think they have several hundred varieties of conifers. Um, and you can check out all sorts of different ones that'll grow uh, pretty close, well, in your climate. And
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe Jeff, you could send me the name of that because I'm not familiar with it. I mean, I've been to a garden down in South Seattle, but I don't think it's that one. No.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, and Bob Fincham's garden, his home garden is pretty incredible too. I'll send you his contact info if you're out.
Where is he in North Seattle?
He's somewhere in that area. I'm not exactly sure what town it is.
Well, I think I went to his garden a couple of years ago with my friend in the Northwest Horticultural or Northwest Perennial Alliance. I was totally, oh God, it was so cool. Yeah,
Yes.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. And he brought a lot of his plants and he's worked with a lot of different growers for the South Seattle Community College. So
Okay,
send you the address.
okay.
Oh, Fincham lives in Puyallup.
Oh, that's Puyallup.
Sorry.
No, that's not the one I went to. This is another man. And okay, well, you'll probably know this other one, but no, I'll have to go down to Puyallup and see that too.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And
Okay. Oh,
I think you can probably stop recording, dear.
yeah, oh,
And
I'm looking for it.
okay. But yeah, another really neat pine Susan says is Burke's red variegated Pinus densiflora. It has it's a dragon's eye type pine, and the variegation in the summertime is the most brilliant, but it usually keeps it throughout the most of the winter as well. But it's a real open pine where you can grow a lot of stuff out under it and around it. So that's
Oh,
a
that
neat one.
sounds very good. That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we're going to stop the recording. But if you would like to ask other random things, go ahead. Just don't forget to register for the upcoming national convention in Cincinnati, Ohio. Um, thanks, everybody. This was actually our last one for this year, so we'll be doing these again next February. If you have ideas of presenters that you would like to see, please let us know. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.